As I mentioned earlier, one of the things we're going to focus on, and none of the above, is finding solutions. There's plenty of problems, but there's very few solutions. And one of the solutions that we're going to address, hopefully many times in many different ways and coming from different angles, is the importance of being politically active. And in this case, today we're going to talk about the importance of citizen lobbyists. A lot of people sit back in their comfy couches and they watch the issues and they yell at the TV, but they don't engage. And there's plenty of issues certainly to engage on, one of which we're going to talk about today is the immigration issue. And our guest today is Warren Klug. He is, well, I like saying this about people, someone who needs no introduction. But certainly Warren comes from one of the most iconic families in all of Aspen. And Warren, if you're like me, you go through life being introduced as Chris's dad, yes. Hillary's dad, Jim's dad, Kathy's husband, right? But in his own right, Warren is a very prominent around town and probably best known for his role as the general manager of the Aspen Square Condominium Hotel. And you can't miss it because it's one of the best locations in town. So I don't know if you found the location, but someone did a great job there. But for today, it's a different hat you're wearing. Today you're wearing a hat as the Chairman Emeritus of the Aspen Chamber Resort Association. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? I always want to say Chamber of Commerce. Do we have a Chamber of Commerce in Aspen?
The Resort Association is it.
It is the Chamber
yes.
of Commerce, all right.
And really, we are the only business-oriented organization, only business advocacy organization in town that's formalized. We, as the Chamber and Resort Association, we do function in terms of normal Chamber of Commerce activities, but a whole lot more too, because as a resort community, we're concerned with marketing and sales and service to our customers and helping them enjoy a great experience here. The Chamber gets involved in helping or sponsoring even special events like Winter School coming up in January, 4th of July. Chamber plays a big role in the Food and Wine event in June. So it's a Chamber of Commerce, but a whole lot more than that.
And we're going to talk about lobbying today. A lot of mm-hmm. Chamber of Commerces tie into the United States Chamber of Commerce for lobbying. Do you tie into them for political issues or lobbying?
Well, we have in the past, okay. But in fact at this point, and a decision made a couple of years ago when I was the chairman of the board of the Chamber, we withdrew from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. While many of our interests would coincide with the U.S. Chamber, particularly in the area of climate control and the environmental issues that are important to Aspen, we found that we were very much in different directions. Some of you may remember the commercials that were on television over the past years showing a family freezing in their living room and the headline sponsored by the U.S. Chamber, something about, you know, if we don't leave the coal producers alone, this is where we're going to be. I mean, things that, positions taken by the Chamber that were just absolutely in opposition to what we feel to be important in Aspen. So actually we resigned, and the world did not come to an end. The U.S. Chamber did not fold. Our $900 a year dues did not put them under. But we felt it was important to take a stand. So on immigration, I will say, which of course is our issue today, our interests do coincide. And we've been in there shoulder to shoulder with the U.S. Chamber as well.
So before the immigration issue came on the screen, had you done lobbying before, either personally or as an association in conjunction with the mm-hmm. Chamber or outside the Chamber, or was this your first foray into
we've done some things and made our opinions known through the Chamber, and particularly, for example, in the area I mentioned of the environment and concerns with what's going on in that arena. But I would say the immigration issue has been one that encouraged much more involvement on the part of the Chamber and its members than anything I can think of in recent years. Now, locally, we're very much involved in efforts that I'm not sure I would call lobbying as much as I would just say making sure that the business community interests are heard, whether it's the issue like the Lift 1A hotel project that seemed to be under discussion for years. We certainly made our opinions known. The issue of how do we get more lodging in the community, which is a big deal for this town, as we've seen our lodging base continue to shrink over the years. So those kinds of local issues we very much have been involved through our Chamber committees. But on the national stage, I would say I'm hard-pressed to think of where we've been as involved as we are in immigration right now.
Okay, so let's get to immigration. You mm-hmm. had kind of a notion of lobbying, and you had a presence more mm-hmm. municipal-based, but all of a sudden there's a national issue. So how does this national issue surface within your organization, and then how do you decide to go about stepping up and getting involved?
Well, the first thing I think is to recognize that there are good reasons for us as individuals, as a chamber organization, those of us in business, there are good reasons to be concerned with the immigration issue. One issue simply is that we have 11 million undocumented people in this country working, and they're working because they're important to their employers. And you have to think that in a state like Colorado, an awful lot of those 11 million people are living and working right here, even in our own community, but certainly throughout the state. I would say my concern and my interest in getting involved in the immigration issue is twofold. Number one, I'm a person who cares about people. I'm a person of faith, and the Lord that I worship says you got to care about everybody, not just the people who look and talk like you, but everybody. And so that's a big issue to me. And clearly, we're dealing with 11 million people who are in a tough spot. How do we deal with them positively? That's one issue. And then the other issue, which I think is extremely important for us, right down here on the local level, as well as a national issue, is it a business issue? We need the employees that we need. And you just look around in a community like Aspen, other mountain resorts, agriculture throughout the state, who's doing the hard work that needs to be done, whether it's housekeepers or kitchen crews or agriculture workers. An awful lot of them do not speak English, or English is their second language. These are immigrants who've come here to work. They're employed because, on the one hand, they want to work, and on the other hand, employers need them. And so I see those two issues, or those two reasons to be involved in the immigration issue. We care about people and treating them in an appropriate, humane way. At the same time, this is very much a business issue. Business needs the people they need.
So you mentioned about a personal attachment to the issue, but now you're, I don't know where you were at the time when the issue first came out with the association. You have an association you have to deal with. You have committees, as you said, you have a board. So how does this issue start to percolate within the association? And by the way, when did it start to percolate? And then how does it move through the organization?
I would say within the chamber it was an issue 2 to 3 years ago, and several of us who were on the chamber board at that time brought it up and said, listen, we need to be advocates for immigration reform. Nobody has all the answers. There are still lots of proposals and ideas floating around. We can talk about that too. But we recognize this especially as a business issue, and as the only business advocacy organization in Aspen, it was appropriate for the chamber to look into the issue and to take a stand. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I believe was the first time we passed a resolution, the chamber board saying this is important, and we call upon our elected officials in Washington, D.C. to address it in positive ways, to look at the different avenues that can be taken to solve these problems. We didn't say, here's the answer, say yes or no, but what we did say is, gee, there are answers out there, we need to make sure they're addressed. And so beyond that, we passed a couple of resolutions. I, in fact, had an opportunity to visit Washington, D.C. a couple of times about 2 years ago, and present our concerns, not only to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, by the way, and enlist their help, but also with our elected leaders, senators and congressmen in Washington. And I've had a chance since a couple of years ago to visit several times back in D.C. and again let our opinions be known.
So let's take a step back. So you bring this issue, or someone brings the issue to the association, and now you've passed a resolution and you're going to move ahead.
Right.
How did you design your lobbying effort? How did you appoint someone, and perhaps it was you, to be the head of the effort? How did you define your issues that you were going to approach? And then what were your initial steps in deciding who to reach out to and how to get that done?
Well, I sort of ended up being kind of the de facto leader of the crowd, so to speak, but there were others too, especially others in the lodging business here in town who jumped right in, because these are our employees we're talking about, people who are working for us, that we want to make sure are treated fairly and can continue to work for us, of course. So I kind of got the ball rolling with different organizations back east and an opportunity to lobby. My first foray into that was perhaps, I guess, about 3 years ago with the American Hotel Lodging Association. They have an annual April fly-in event where they have people from hotels all over the country come in and meet with their elected leaders with a specific 1, 2, or 3 point agenda and present our concerns and our issues. And that was my first lobbying opportunity, kind of orchestrated by someone else, but I was there to do it. And it was an eye-opener. One eye-opening fact is it seems like our federal government's run by 24-year-olds, and you've seen that yourself, I know. Everybody in Congress, all the employees and aides and everybody else, look like they're about 16, but they're really 24. And that was kind of fun to see. But you also realize that there are all kinds of people with different issues pounding on our elected leaders and meeting with them, and their issue is really important. And how an elected leader in the Senate or the House can sort through all that, I'm not sure, but it's a real challenge. How does our issue get to rise to the top on their priority list where they really will pay attention, really will listen to people, and consider the right kind of direction? That's a real challenge, it seems to me.
And by the way, that's a very important point. In fact, the first time I was lobbying in Washington, you know, I'm a lobbyist in my day job. I worked on a piece of legislation that took about 2 years. And let's say over those 2 years I lobbied 100 hours. I probably sat and spoke with the congressman or the senator who I was working with for a total of 7 minutes.
Yes.
And then 99 hours and 53 minutes was working with the staff. So
Yes.
I don't know if a lot of people understand what a staff-driven model this is. And again, I'm not trying to say it's an imperfect model. It's just that, as you said, the reality is that time is valuable for these elected officials, and most of the time you are dealing with staff.
That's correct. Also, their time is not their own. You know, all of a sudden they expected to meet with you, spend a few minutes, but then a vote is called, and they got to be gone.
Exactly.
And so, you're right. In my own experience, and I've been back to D.C., I don't know, maybe 8 times on this issue over the past 2 or 3 years, and absolutely most of the time you are not meeting with the elected official. You're meeting with their staff people, and that's just the way it is. But you do have to think that your messages get presented, perhaps not with the greatest of urgency or the importance that we would put on them, but they do get presented to the elected leaders, and that's how the system works.
So how did you decide to start? So you have your resolution, you're out of Washington, you're meeting with the hotel people, et cetera, and you're reaching out to your congressman. Who was the congressman at the time? Was it Tipton or was it someone else?
It was Scott Tipton.
Well,
yes.
Scott Tipton. So have you written a letter? Have you called ahead for a meeting? How have you engaged his office on this issue?
Well, I have written a number of letters to him.
I mean, at this time.
Sure.
Yeah.
At that time, I had written and had called his office. I had talked to some of his people. He's got a satellite office in Steamboat and then down in Pueblo as well, and Grand Junction also. And I've had a chance to talk to some of his staff people. But I would say my first foray into the D.C. arena, it was all set up by the Hotel Association.
Okay.
And then I learned how to do it, and then we got into that.
And I think that's important because a lot of people
is.
feel as though there's a congressman out there somewhere, but they don't know how to approach them or write the letter. And but in your experience was you went through a conduit because you felt there was
my first time.
The first
That's
time you went
correct.
through that.
And that was very helpful, and you learn how to do it. And in fact, as part of that program, before we had our Capitol Hill meetings, the Hotel Association had a whole program about lobbying, how to do it, what works, what you don't want to do, and that sort of thing. And that was how. And one of the things they mentioned is don't be offended if you're not really meeting with your congressman. Instead you're meeting with an aide who we hope keeps notes and passes them on.
So you're out to Washington, you have these meetings, you come back, and what's next then? Where do you decide to go, and how do you keep this lobbying thing moving?
Well, I felt it was important to continue to follow up by email and by letters to our congressman. As it happens, on the immigration issue, our own Michael Bennet, our own senator here in Colorado, played a major role in writing the legislation that came out of the Senate. And his staff people were very, very much involved in all of that. And I've developed some friendships and good contacts with them, and it's been very helpful.
So you reached out to Congressman Tipton, and you reached out to Senator Bennet, and those are your primary focuses in terms of lobbying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you're working with staff?
Yes. And I will say, though, that the last time I was there, for example, we had an opportunity to meet with Michael Kaufman, who is in the Denver area, congressman, and also Cory Gardner, who is outside of Denver, in the eastern end of the state, and then as well as our own Scott Tipton here. And I've had an opportunity to meet and talk with Congressman Tipton several times here in our own community. I attended a town hall meeting last summer that he did over in Leadville, and in fact, just a couple weeks ago, we had a business roundtable event right here in Aspen where We had 8 or 9 different business people here in our community join with Scott Tipton and talk about strictly the immigration issue. It was a very interesting meeting and very helpful. And it was gratifying to see all these different people with different business interests sitting around the table with basically the same message. It's time to do something. There are solutions out there. Let's not let this whole thing die and get nowhere.
Now, who has called this last meeting you talked about? Has the congressman organized it, or is a coalition group come together?
It was through the chamber. ACRA sponsored it, and we had
ACRA? Oh,
Aspen
okay.
Chamber Resort Association sponsored it, and
I'm a little slow on the uptake here.
no problem. And working with Scott Tipton's office and also Frida Wallison, the local Republican chairperson, who was a great help in helping us make contact
Navigate.
and set up arrangements.
Right. Well, I think you're going about this the right way. One of the things that I've learned about lobbying is, and it's one of my wife's expression, if you can't go in the front door, you have to go in the back door. If you can't go in the back door, you got to kind of climb through the window. And it's up to you as the person seeking access. You've got to find the way to get the access.
Right. And I think one of the things that's important is to say we're not out here to demand anything. And when I read articles in the immigration issue, for example, about people demanding outcomes, I think that is such an unfortunate approach, and I think not particularly helpful. I think rather the approach is, listen, we all know there's a problem here. And by the way, on immigration, everybody knows it. Everybody says the system's broken, we got to do better. But in fact, if we do nothing, which is kind of where we are right now, at a standstill, then we're continuing a system that doesn't work, that everybody acknowledges is not good, but it's still in place. So an issue like immigration is one where there are ideas and there are proposals out there, and you have to think that the majority of people in Scott Tipton's, for example, Scott Tipton's district, which is almost half of the state of Colorado, all the western slope areas, it's an important issue to the people in his district. 6 major ski areas are located in the 3rd district, and all kinds of agriculture. Agriculture interests are here, and you go down to Grand Junction, who's picking the peaches? Who's taking care of the grapes and the vines, and apples over in Hotchkiss, and who's doing all the work? Scott Tipton's district includes a whole lot of people for whom English is not their first language.
So my experience is, particularly in today's dysfunctional world of politics, to get something done, you have to create pressure. The congressmen and the senators, they've got to feel pressure. Now, on immigration, quite frankly, this has been going on for 15 or 20 years. We've talked about immigration reform. We haven't gotten there. In the last general election, I think there was a sense coming out of that the Hispanic vote was being recognized as a very critical vote.
Yes.
That was going to create some pressure.
Yes.
And it probably did manifest itself in a bill coming out of the U.S. Senate. And I do want to talk about that in a minute, but before we get to that, what do you feel you're doing, if at all successfully, locally, to keep pressure on? How are you building pressure with the congressman to make him feel that he's got to get something done? How are you doing that?
I'm not sure that I would use the word pressure, but I would say I'd like to.
Okay.
Fair enough. I would like to encourage him and make known to him that this is an important business issue. And when we met with him a couple of weeks ago, I made this comment. I said, as a registered Republican, I look at this whole issue and say the Republicans are the wrong side, because in addition to the concern with the individuals involved, this is hugely a business issue, and businesses need the people that they need. And I think as the party of business, supposedly, that the Republicans need to be out front advocating for appropriate immigration reform. And this is not a giveaway. This is not amnesty. This is recognizing the facts on the ground. What are we going to do with those 11 million people? And how can we make sure they can stay here, work legally? How can we make sure that the businesses that want to employ them can have legal employees? We want to follow the law, and we want our employees to be legal. That's our goal. That's the goal of every business. At the same time, we need the people that we need. So it's a real challenge in that regard.
So as I mentioned earlier, my word pressure, and there seemed to have been some pressure on the U.S. Senate, and they did pass a bill in June, I think. And of course, Civics 101 says the same bill that passes the Senate has to pass the House, and if the same bills don't match up, they have to have a conference to come up with a new bill. But the House right now does not seem it wants to go down the path that the Senate has taken. So,
well, they won't even vote on it. They won't even, you know, the Speaker Boehner won't even allow a vote, because if there is a vote, there's a chance that it would pass, or at least enough of it would be addressed that they'd end up in a conference committee and something would come out of it. So far, while Speaker Boehner says it's not off the table, we're still going to talk about it, there's still a chance for immigration reform, but if a vote is not allowed, it's going to die on the vine, and that would be a tragedy in my mind.
So let's talk about the Speaker. Obviously, Speaker Boehner runs the House. Nothing's being voted on without his say.
Right.
I'm going to come back to my pressure word. Now, obviously, ACRA, is that what you call yourselves? ACRA sitting here in little Aspen isn't going to put pressure on the Boehner unless he gets on one of the chair lifts and we turn off the electricity and we don't let him off the chair until he moves the bill, right?
Well, that's one strategy.
That's one strategy, right. So having said that, how are you working with the coalition or anyone to maybe build some pressure there? Are you going back to the Hotel Association? Yes. Where are you? What are you doing to build that lobbying effort and that pressure?
The Hotel Association continues to be an important lobby interest in this issue, because so many hotel and hospitality industry employees are affected by what comes out of the legislation. In addition, I think that there needs to be a groundswell of businesses, like the businesses in Aspen and others, who say not only to our own local congressmen and to our statewide people, but I think on the federal level, something has to be done, because we need the employees that we need. And when you read stories, and these happen in Colorado as well as other states, you read stories of a guy, a farmer in Fort Collins, whose vegetable crop, he can only pick half of it because the rest of it, he doesn't have the employees, he can't get the people. He's trying to do things legally, can't get the employees, half his crops are rotting in the field. It happened to and there was a big story last year about a corn farmer in Olathe, right here on the western slope, who tried to hire local people, tried to do it right, and ended up, he could not harvest all of his crop. I talked to a lady who was involved in the peach orchard business in Grand Junction. This is, you know, hour and a half, 2 hours away from us. And talking about a farmer that could not harvest his peaches with legal help, and he had no choices.
Now, one of the topics we're going to work on again on None of the Above is how to use this amazing tool called the internet to get people engaged in government, to lobby, et cetera. Do you have a Facebook page? Do you tweet? What do you do, if anything, to communicate and again, build this coalition you need?
Well, you know, I haven't gotten involved in that, and although I do send my share of
I highly recommend it then.
Well, then I would appreciate the input on that. One of my concerns, though, is that a congressman gets so much communication that way, that how does any of it rise to the top? And that's just a question I would ask you, because, I mean, how many emails and tweets and so forth do you think these guys get? I think they get mountains of it. And how does any of it really end up making an impression and making a difference?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I do know if you don't try and you don't create this volume and you don't create this pressure, then you won't get what you want.
Well, that's a good point.
So I think it's going back to getting in the front door and the side door and the window, you have to keep all these avenues open. And if your group and the groups you're working with, your coalition, has not yet investigated how to maximize the internet, I think that's probably your next step here.
That probably is something that we should take a good hard look at, no question.
Warren, this is terrific.
It's been my pleasure,
You are
Stephen,
my
thank you.
First guest, my best guest ever. This will be the best interview ever on None of the Above.